Great civilizations are always the architect of their own downfall. Historian Arnold Toynbee studied 28 different great civilizations and found the same pattern. Great civilizations commit suicide. Anne Glyn Jones spent 9 years studying how civilizations decline. She describes our culture as one that has, quote, run its course, which is morally, aesthetically, and spiritually bankrupt. Is the background hum of constant anxiety that pervades our culture a sign that we know the end is nigh? More Americans than ever are dying from drug overdoses. Gun violence, car crashes, or AIDS never killed as many Americans in a single year as overdoses did in 2017. But the issue isn't just prescription drugs. In the UK, so much cocaine is flushed into the rivers that endangered eels are becoming hyperactive and not reaching sexual maturity. The number of 16 to 24-year-olds using coke, ecstasy, crystal meth, and LSD doubled in just a 2-year period from 2016 to 2018. In the US, heroin abuse has skyrocketed over the past 15 years. The number of people who used MDMA, marijuana, and other drugs also consistently climbed over the last decade. Alcoholism is on the rise. 1 in 8 Americans is now an alcoholic. And when it comes to taking antidepressants, white rural communities have overtaken African American communities for the first time ever. Depression levels in America are the highest ever measured. Suicide rates are higher than ever. Despite all our technology, our entertainment, our consumerism, our chemical enhancements, we're more miserable than ever before. Our existential dread is more pronounced than ever before. Educational, intellectual, and material ease has manifested civilizational malaise and a lack of transcendent purpose. The result of this lack of transcendent purpose is self-destruction, not merely on a personal, but on a population scale. Technical sophistication has been accompanied by mass incompetence in the art of living. When a society has no purpose to believe in, it self-immolates. There's only so far that quasi-religious devotion to yoga, Starbucks pumpkin-spiced lattes, and Whole Foods kale shakes can go. The latest iPhone can only distract you from the nagging voice of conscience for so long. Endlessly consuming products will never satiate the soul. We live in the ruins of a civilization that has lost faith in itself. A civilization that is constantly lectured it must be ashamed of itself, and slowly subverted and destroyed from within as the only form of repentance.
And if you're wondering how we wound up in the dark age we're currently living through, this is how we did. This is why important science is no longer being conducted. This is why art isn't being made. This is why comedy is dying. It's why people aren't thinking for themselves anymore, which means the end of creativity.
Great civilizations collapse when the insatiable greed for sensual stimulation outweighs the urge for any kind of private or social responsibility. We're now reaching this point. French author Michel Houellebecq predicted both the rise of Islamism across Europe and the emergence of the Yellow Vest movement. As Theodore Dalrymple writes about the themes of Houellebecq's novels, the vacuity of modern life in the West, its lack of transcendence, lived as it is, increasingly without religious or political belief, without a worthwhile creative culture, often without deep personal attachments, and without even a struggle for survival. Into what Salman Rushdie called a God-shaped hole has rushed the search for sensual pleasure, which, however, no more than distracts. And where is the church in all this? Where are the firebrands railing against the vulgarity of modernity? Affiliation with the Church of England is at a record low. Just 2% of young people are affiliated. And in the US alone, the Christian population decreased by nearly 8% between 2007 and 2014. We're bulldozing churches and building ugly, gigantic, glassy monuments to insipid vacuity. Great civilizations collapse when they experience a rapid and enduring loss of population and identity. The number of babies born to Muslims is expected to surpass those born to Christians between 2030 and 2035. Muslim fertility remains high while Christians are literally dying out. Meanwhile, the global leader of the Catholic Church is the biggest cheerleader for his own flock's decline. If only there was a religious leader who understood the peril that we're in.
On vous sent inquiet pour le monde occidental. Qu'est-ce qui vous inquiète?
Vous savez, la plus grande inquiétude, c'est que l'Europe ne veut plus ou a perdu l'essence de ses origines. Il a perdu ses racines. Or, un arbre qui n'a pas de racines, il meurt. Et j'ai peur que l'Occident meure. Il y a beaucoup de signes, voyez-vous, beaucoup de signes, plus de natalité. Et vous êtes envahi quand même par d'autres cultures, d'autres peuples, qui vont progressivement vous dominer en nombre et changer totalement votre culture, vos convictions, vos valeurs.
And where are conservatives in all this? Giving giant corporations huge tax breaks so they can import vast quantities of people from the third world and then pay them slave wages, while white Americans addicted to opioids live lives of atomized, nihilistic hopelessness. Is that conservatism? At this point, what exactly are we conserving? Those GDP numbers, though. Is it conservative to allow Amazon to pay $0 in taxes on $11.2 billion on profit for 2018? And for progressives, so long as Jeff Bezos' virtue signals the right identity politics, who cares, right? Great civilizations collapse when the economy serves not to elevate, but to denigrate the population. We're now reaching this point. Our entire economy has become centered around a crony capitalist system that eviscerates the family, leading to atomization, misery, and depression.
In 2015, a study by the decidedly non-conservative Brookings Institution found that falling male wages caused about a quarter of the decline in marriage rates over the past 35 years. 2 years later, MIT researchers found that when factories close, marriage rates go down and single parenthood becomes more common. And that, as you could guess, causes a higher proportion of children to wind up on drugs or in prison. So it's not a small thing. And by the way, many other studies have reached the same conclusions over long periods of time. This is real.
As French philosopher Eric Zemmour outlines, the elite have stopped caring about native populations. Why? Because those populations no longer tolerate stagnant wage growth and diminished job prospects, simply to enslave themselves as a servant class for the elite. That's why they're on the streets rioting. So far easier for the elite just to replace them with robots and a third world slave class. Great civilizations collapse when the supply of labor outstrips demand. We're now reaching this point. Great civilizations collapse when wealth inequality runs rampant. We're now reaching this point. Great civilizations collapse when the elite debases the currency to hide financial problems. We're now reaching this point.
And the Democratic Party, for whatever reason, is not trying to address those problems. They're attacking Trump himself or the symptoms, but the disease is this pervasive economic insecurity as we make it harder and harder for Americans to find meaningful opportunities.
Great civilizations collapse when the building block of society, the family unit, crumbles into dust. We're now reaching this point. While Muslims in the West unite to rally around protection of their children, we treat ours like an unwanted medical waste product. While Muslims in the West refuse to allow their kids to be indoctrinated with warped sexual propaganda, we dress up ours as drag queens, parade them on television, and demand everyone embrace it as normal. It's not normal. There's something deeply wrong with what we've become. Now, for all its barbarity, at least Islam provides its adherents with some sense of meaning and fulfillment. Time to join the winning team. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The Mayan civilization collapsed when the Spanish invasion inflicted upon it a foreign culture intent on spreading its own systems of faith and governance. Beginning to notice any parallels?
Historically, the movement toward androgyny occurs in late phases of culture, okay, as a civilization is starting to unravel, okay, and that you can find it again and again and again through history in the Greek art, okay, you can see it happening. All of a sudden, okay, there's a kind of the sculptures of handsome nude young men athletes that used to be very robust, okay, in the archaic period suddenly began to seem like wet noodles, okay, toward the end, okay, and that the people who live in such periods, a late phase of culture, whether it's the Hellenistic era, whether it's the Roman Empire, whether it's the Mauve decade of Oscar Wilde in the 1890s, whether it's Weimar Germany. People who live at such times, okay, feel that they're very sophisticated, they're very cosmopolitan, okay, homosexuality, heterosexuality, so what, anything goes, and so on. All right, and so, but from the perspective of historical distance, okay, you can see that it's a culture that no longer believes in itself, okay, and then what you invariably get are people who are convinced of the power of heroic masculinity, okay, on the edges, whether they're the Vandals and the Huns, okay, or whether they're the barbarians of ISIS, okay, you see them, starting to mass on the outsides of the culture, and that's what we have right now.
What does our culture provide? A tedious drip of anodyne lethargic dross, or at the other end of the spectrum, a sewer pipe of obscene, tawdry hedonism. What does our society provide? A lifestyle of never talking to or knowing your neighbours, of aborting your babies, of cheating on your wives. A lifestyle of desperately searching for the next dopamine hit, whether that be from an Instagram like, a pharmaceutical drug, or a new gadget. A lifestyle of strip malls, 5-lane traffic, shit recycled pop songs, shit recycled movies, shit recycled NPC celebrities, all spouting the same opinions. Our art may become so degenerate that future generations will be completely uninterested in it. And I'm sorry, but free market capitalism just doesn't cut it anymore as a purposeful credo to unite and fortify Western civilization. It takes much more than an increasingly unjust economic system to maintain a civilization, which is why the enemies are at the gates, waiting to take over, which is why socialist vulture demagogues are busy licking their lips. We've abandoned the Enlightenment values that built Western civilization. We've abandoned the idea that family is fundamental to community strength and happiness. We've abandoned high culture in favour of lowbrow junk culture. We've abandoned stoic strength of character in favour of chemical dependence. We labour under an economic and political system that has abandoned us. We collectively killed God. We're left with nothing authentic to believe in. That's why everyone's on drugs. That's why everyone's nihilistic. That's why everyone's unhappy. What's the solution? There is no solution. Every great civilization collapses on average every 336 years. And the collapse of ours is very much overdue.